Okay, so in this course, you're going to learn about SQL. And I'm going to cover some of the most important concepts when it comes to learning how to use a SQL database. So there are a lot of different topics that are going to be introduced. But again, as I just briefly mentioned, we are going to focus a lot on the fundamentals of SQL databases and how to work with a SQL database, how to write queries. But when you get into this, please know that there are so many advanced topics related to any database that you could really spend your entire career becoming a master of any specific SQL database. The goal of this course is not to have you become a master. The goal of this course is to help you understand the most fundamental nature of these databases and how to write queries. Based on my experience, the knowledge that's discussed in this course will be used to create 90%, maybe 95% of what you will do when you're using a SQL database. But there is not going to cover 100% because we don't know what type of applications you're going to deal with. And maybe some of the advanced applications you deal with, maybe you have to learn something advanced and use that specific to your project. But almost with any technology, when you look at the official documentation, the documentation has to be comprehensive because it needs to cover all these edge cases. But there are usually these fundamental things that are used over and over and over again for all the different projects. And my rule of thumb is almost 10% of the documentations are actually used to create 90% of anything for that technology. So in this course, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to introduce the most fundamentals and intentionally leave out certain concepts that I think are not relevant at that stage. Or I may introduce some of those concepts a little bit later on. So you may have heard me speak about this, but the must-to-know concepts I'm going to try to introduce assignments so that you get more familiar and you really internalize them. And then I'm going to introduce some nice-to-know concepts so that you may have a better, wider understanding on some things. But the nice-to-know concepts are things that you may not use that much, but it's just a nice to know. And then what I call no need to know concepts, the things that you probably won't use ever, except if you work on some specific edge cases. I'm intentionally not going to bring that in this course so that we can keep this course simple and it can be one of the most effective course to help you level up on the fundamentals. Okay, so that's how the course is going to be structured. Now, some of the things that the course is going to cover, SQL database, how it works, how to set it up, how to write efficient queries, how to do join statements, how to do group by statements, aggregate functions, all those things will be introduced. And after that, I'll introduce some concepts about scaling and how to make SQL queries more efficient and effective. So we're going to talk about some of those. But really one step at a time is what we're going to do. And then I'm going to try to introduce some concepts through video so you can watch me. But I know that you probably don't want to replay the videos over and over again. So on each of the things, I'm going to provide some text description below the video that you can read, or when you later reference as you do some of the assignments or as you work on the project, instead of watching the whole video, you can just read. But if there is a video and you haven't watched that, I would strongly recommend you watch all the videos and then read the text followed by assignments to get the most out of the course. Okay, having said that, before we go into some of the specifics, let's first talk about the why. Why do people use a SQL database? So kind of in the high-end picture. Okay, again, before we go into how to use a SQL database, let's talk about why people use a SQL database. So there are some articles that I wrote, analogies that I've used, the IKEA store analogy, to explain how HTTP request and response work. So especially for web applications, but you can use a database also for mobile applications or desktop application. a database becomes a very, very important piece. If you think of Amazon or Facebook, you can imagine how these websites would store lots of data. A lot of times, those data are stored in a database. In the big scheme of things, too, databases break it down to SQL database or non-SQL database. Sometimes it's also referred as relational database versus a non-relational database. And as you level up and as you get better and as you learn about database design, which you will learn a little bit later, you will understand what the difference between a relational database as well as a non-relational database is. But regardless of whether the database is relational, non-relational, whether the information is stored in memory versus hard drive or something else, all of these databases are designed just to store information. Okay? All right, so now after you have watched this, go proceed to the next part. And I'm going to elaborate more on the different databases that exist and how SQL kind of fits in to that big picture.